What's up, everybody? Happy holiday. Iconic Repaints here. I'd done a poll probably a few weeks ago asking if I should do more content that's related to the Godzilla series as far as the films go and other media, rather than just focusing on the repaints that I do, the kits coming out, the shows and the statues and things like that, right? So there was a pretty strong response that I should kind of open this channel up a little bit. So with that in mind, there's really no place to begin besides the beginning, right? So what I want to do is kind of just go through pretty much most of the Godzilla movies, but some of the other key monster movies as well, and just kind of hopefully give a little bit of a new insight on some of these things, as well as maybe open up a new dialogue if you guys are willing to participate. It could be really cool. So without further ado, let's kind of get into this a little bit. Now, before I get started, I'd like to make it clear that I by no means I don't have the time to go in and, like an encyclopedia, research every behind the scenes note of these movies. I'm talking as a viewer, as a witness, and as a lifelong fan of 37 years. Now, I have seen, just like probably many of you have, many great channels that really dig into the details of all these movies, and I have no problem suggesting or referencing any of those channels to you guys, but just for keeping things moving and not being overly redundant, not trying to ride the coattails of any of those other channels, I'm going to get started. We are starting, of course, with the classic, the original Godzilla 1954. Now, what is there to say about this movie that hasn't already been cycled through many times from every other channel about this movie? We all know it's a fantastic movie. We all know it's responsible for creating the longest running film franchise of all time, as well as giving us one of the most beloved movie monsters that's ever existed. Now, there are a few things that I do want to talk about, and I'm trying to not talk about the things that have been talked about to death, right? So, we know about Godzilla's rampage on Tokyo and how he's the physical manifestation of nuclear war and nature's revenge. We know about the great human characters that carry the task of making this feel very real and horrifying and relatable. We know about this complicated but somewhat familiar love triangle that kind of becomes at its heart the source of the turmoil for the ultimate solution against Godzilla. But what I want to talk about specifically in this video happens way earlier. A lot of what I think makes this movie even more interesting is encapsulated in one scene earlier in the film when Godzilla makes landfall on Odo Island during the typhoon. This scene is so beautiful and horrifying at the same time. It doesn't feel like it's shot in a B-movie studio lot. It carries exceptional tension and panic, chaos, while giving just a tease, just a glimpse of the monster itself. The music is very frantic, and it's also showing the stakes. These human characters, not everybody's safe. The way it's shot for its time in 1954, it looks really realistic, with the trees falling down, the shingles flowing off the roofs, and the wind, the helicopter rolling on its side. Just the little glimpse you get of Godzilla's thigh busting through a house. It looks far ahead of its time, and part of this is because, obviously, with it being black and white, a lot of the darkness probably hides where you would typically see the budget restrictions for this kind of movie. In this case, it actually enhances the feeling that you have while watching. And this scene is preceded by a Japanese dance that is supposed to keep the evil spirits away. So, right after they kind of take this moment to ward off the evil spirits, or so they think, Godzilla pretty much shows up right after and basically shows like, nah, that ain't gonna work here. You see, in the early Godzilla movies, Godzilla is looked at from very much a scientific role, like how he got here, what he is, how he works. A lot of times in the earlier films, it's mostly a very scientific response, but this film here does a good job of balancing the scientific explanation for Godzilla's existence and the spiritual aspect of Godzilla's existence. After this movie, Godzilla's spiritual nature doesn't really get brought up too often. Maybe for a few decades even, until they kind of revisit it in some of the later movies, but I think it's equally as important, and what makes this film very unique is there is a mixture of both here. Now, maybe that doesn't sound too unique, right? King Kong had something similar, but unlike King Kong, where it was just an island that was closed off and disconnected from the rest of civilization, these people on Odo Island, they're modern people. I mean, they live on this island, sure, where this legend of Godzilla lurks, but they know of modern civilization. They know of modern transportation, of helicopters going back and forth, of boats carrying people back and forth. Like, they're a modern civilization as well, and they still fear Godzilla to such a spiritual core. You know, they believe that Godzilla affected their fishing levels, and to sacrifice a girl to Godzilla to eat so that it would keep him happy. Which leads me to believe that Godzilla, in their standpoint, was already a known creature before the atomic bombs, which also leads me to wonder what Godzilla was, at least from this film's position, what he was before he was affected by the nuclear bomb. You know, we see Godzilla in later films, much later, how he was before the nuclear bomb and how he was after the nuclear bomb, right? What was he? But we never, got it in this case. It's not even really implied. We know from Dr. Yamane that Godzilla changed after being affected by nuclear bombs, but again, what was he beforehand? I find this really interesting. And another thing I actually remember from this film that a lot of people don't speak about is the end of the film when Dr. Serizawa is at the bottom of the ocean with the oxygen destroyer, and he's luring Godzilla to him so he could release the weapon, or unleash the weapon upon him, right? And Godzilla is walking to him curious. It seems to be like the first time where Godzilla doesn't have a very violent nature and energy around him. He seems more curious. Now, I don't know if this was actually really the intention or if it's just the limitations of obviously the expressions of the suit, but the impact that it had on me as a viewer, I've never forgotten. It's one of the few times where you had such a horrifying monster for so much of the film that was kind of like, even behind the scenes, just this lingering feeling of doom. But in the climax of the movie, he seems just like a victim. Like, despite him trampling hundreds, if not thousands of people or burning their corpses, I can't help but feel sorry for this monster that's now walking into this trap, who would have never had been there if it really wasn't for mankind's actions themselves. So the last scene that we have of this Godzilla is him walking unknowingly into his death trap and dying this ultimately agonizing death, right? And I just always remember thinking, like, okay, this really wasn't so much like King Kong, where a lot of the damage he causes is just him trying to escape this world that he has found himself in, right? This is a monster that goes out of his way to angrily murder and destroy. And yet, what an accomplishment and what an achievement at the very end of this movie to make you sympathize with this monster as well as the man that takes his life with him. Those are really two scenes that linger on me each time I watch this movie. They always have from the beginning. I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but I am interested in your thoughts and opinions. What stood out to you the most watching Godzilla 1954 for the first time and every time after that? Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.